Thank you very much, Esther. And I thank you all for being here this morning. It is a pleasure for me to address the media on these issues, which I believe are very, very important to all of us. Let me just make some general comments on the issues of migration. And I'll start by saying that what we have to realize and what is very, very important to the African Union is the fact that most of the migrations or the movements of people is happening within the continent. That's very, very important, and this underlines most of the activities of the African Union towards the migration issue. And let me put this straight to you that, in fact, it's only a very small number of the migrants in Europe right now that are Africans. This has to be outlined also. Yes, it is of great importance to us. It's a big number of our people that's moving towards Europe, but they don't form the majority. This is very, very important to be underlined in the first instance. And the third aspect of it that you need to know is the fact that migration is not all challenges. There are opportunities. And we in the African Union are trying very hard to look at the opportunities as well that migration offers. Now, I know the next question that you will be asking from experience, what I hear from the press most of the time is, what is Africa doing towards the problem of migration? So I'll preempt that and start addressing that. I know it will still continue to come up. Now, you can look at it in two ways. We have some short-term or immediate measures that we are putting forward, and the actual root of the problem we try to address, but this is a little bit more on the long-term kind of a process. Now, what I call short-term is, say, for instance, we have in the Agenda 2063 the issue of silencing the guns. And this now goes towards our issues on governance, making sure that we have stable governance, stable governments in Africa, and maybe reduce the number of people who may need to move out because of governance or political issues. Short, medium term. Then the other one is we're talking about now the free movement of people in Africa. There are quite a number of countries that have now introduced visa-free programs within their countries. We're talking about visa-free stay in every African country for the first 30 days. So we are introducing issues like that. Again, by doing that, with this free movement of people, we can also give another alternative for people. Rather than trekking northwards, they could also do the south-to-south issue. That way, again, we intend to decrease the number of people who present themselves to the Mediterranean. Then we have programs on the ground, for instance, like the JLMP, Joint Labor Migration Program. You know, this is looking at the way whereby we could create jobs for youth and then make sure that we provide work for the youth, and again towards decreasing the number of people heading towards the Mediterranean and crossing the Sahara Desert. And these are programs we are working together with the European Union and most other members. Then there are very, very important programs within the African Union, like the Horn of Africa Initiative. You know, this is looking at human trafficking, you know, and the smuggling of migrants towards Europe. Now, we believe that this can be handled by looking at the points of origin, the major countries, you know, within the points of origin, and then the major countries also that are in the transit areas, and then the destinations. Well, from our own side, the program is very, very active. It's taking the dominant countries like Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Egypt, and we are meeting, and this is mostly towards trying to see if we can use border arrangements. We're working with Interpol, working with crime prevention authorities to make sure that we do something about trafficking of human beings, and particularly the issue of smugglers. Now, on the long term, I have always said this: the only way you can reduce considerably, not stop migration, because you will never stop migration, people will always move, even if you give them everything that they want, is we need to make Africa palatable, suitable, and conducive for our youth, for our people to stay here. I mean, if you provide all that, nobody will really want to move. But having said that, even after providing all that, people also tend to move. And remember, it's not only Africans that move, everybody moves. So they move from one place to the other for one reason or the other. But at least we believe that if we make this continent suitable for everybody, then maybe people will, the number of people moving towards Europe and towards other places could probably decrease. Now, this means diversifying our economy. It means industrialization. It means increasing productivity. It means increasing jobs, good health services, good education, and good infrastructure within the continent. Again, this is what Agenda 2063 is speaking to. But this is a little bit long term. I think that is for migration. Let me talk a little bit on the issue of the African CDC, which I think is the next in our agenda. But let me make one point very clear here. The issue of the Africa Centers for Disease Control did not come as a result of the Ebola outbreak. This is something I always want to outline right from the beginning. This came up during, in 2013 during the conference, the Abuja plus 12 meeting, of heads of states. It was an extraordinary meeting. And it was at that time, our ministers of health already saw the importance of the Africa Centers for Disease Control. Now, it turned out that a few months after that, there was the Ebola outbreak. And it was it's a coincidence, a very interesting coincidence, but then it boosted that particular activity of establishing the Africa Centers for Disease Control. And it came seriously to the attention of our heads of state. But before that, even in May of 2014, when we had the WHO and AU Ministers of Health meeting, we were already discussing the issue of Ebola and the Africa Centers for Disease Control. Now, the rest of it, I'm sure you've heard over and over again. The African Union, for the first time, was involved in the issue of trying to put medical personnel on the ground rather than the usual issue of peacekeepers, armed forces that we have standby. This was very appropriate because during the Ebola crisis, at the height of the Ebola crisis, there were lots of activities from outside, international community. Everybody responded, but they responded in a very interesting way. Ebola affected people, it affected communities, people died, but then the response was mostly in terms of laboratories, drugs, advisors, and that kind of personnel. But we believed in the African Union at the time that this is an issue that involves people. While we were trying to set up the equipment, set up the laboratories, people were talking about building health services, the people were already dying. So this, again, is what stimulated the African Union to say, okay, we put people on the ground. And we had a very, very good response, from quite a number of member states who provided medical personnel, they provided material, provided technical support, and that's how we got a team of up to about 850 people on the ground in the 3 countries at the time. This was very appropriate because it gave reference to the issue of African solutions to African problems, which we thought we addressed very, very well at the time. It was not easy at that time because the African Union has, as I said before, has never done an activity like this before. So we had to take into cognizance our peace and security colleagues who assisted us. So in fact, at the beginning, it was both a military and a civilian plan. Military for the efficiency, of working in crisis areas. And then we needed the political clout, which we actually managed to put in place at the time. What happened after that, I'm sure we all know. But then the most interesting thing we should be talking about now, as far as the ASEOA response and the Ebola crisis was concerned, is what next after that. So we've had quite a number of meetings, a series of meetings of post-Ebola, plans, the response, the kind of thing we should not see happening again a second time. And I must say, we've been very active on that. We identified the issue of organization, the issue of funding, the issue of readily getting in place the right kind of medical personnel to send to any such crisis, whenever, or if ever it ever happens again. And this, again, it's got two programs into consideration. That is the one of the AVOC, which I'll be talking about, the Africa Volunteer Health Corps, which, again, was a product of this. And then the issue of funding, the Africa Fund that we're trying to put forward to make sure that the first problem which we had was the problem of organization. It will be taken care of, by being prepared. It's very important to know that the best way to prepare for these epidemics is to make sure that you are ready before they happen. This is one very, very good lesson that we learned from the Ebola crisis, and we have been working towards that. We want not only the African Union, but all the member states to put up institutions in place to make sure that they are prepared if or whenever such an incident occurs again. So I'm sure the details of some of this may probably come with the questions you may bring up. The issue of funding, if you recall, we discovered the ability and the capacity of our private sector in terms of funding. Again, this boosted our activities for, again, African solutions to African problems and the issue of domestic financing. Africa itself trying to fund its own programs, be it through member states' governments, and here in this case, the private sector was very, very commendable in this particular issue. I'll leave the rest of that to questions that may come up. I think the next issue was child marriage, or let me do the AVOC because it follows through. This the African Volunteer Health Corps, as I said, is a program that the heads of state have already endorsed. A concept note is out. We've had several meetings, several technical programs are on board in terms of getting that to be operational. Now, the whole idea is, if you recall, it took us, we did very well, it took us a month to put together the 855 people that we sent. But if we have a group of health personnel identified in various member states that are trained to handle epidemics like this, now we are very lucky. Now we have a core of about 800 people who are already very good at this, who have had experience. So we have health personnel like that on the ground. So when something happens, it's the issue of mobilizing them. So mobilization will be quite fast, not like what happened during the last outbreak. Then another issue again that this issue of the Africa Volunteer Health Corps will address is the issue of organization. I personally had the experience of being in Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia at the very, very height of the Ebola outbreak. And I can tell you what I remember very well from that was the disorganized nature all of us had, and this includes the international community. This includes everybody who was there. We sat in hotel lobbies, did a lot of talking, and we're talking about Ebola while you're talking. Every minute somebody falls off and dies, and when somebody dies, 20, 30 more will die because of that one person that died. We spent too much time planning then. So this brings me back to what I said. The best way to plan for Ebola or to fight Ebola is to put institutions in place, or this goes for all crises, medical or health or any other crisis, have the right institution in place before the epidemic starts. Because when you do that, then you are ready to actually respond to the crisis. Now, let me just say a few things about the child marriage. This is a very, very important initiative in the African Union, for several reasons. One, I think child marriage is sitting on top of the table when you're talking about harmful traditional practices. It's so important because it's a little bit obscure. It doesn't come out like female genital mutilation, but believe me, the effects are probably equal or much, much worse. Now, it impinges economically, culturally, medically, all aspects, even our socio-economic development on the continent is hard hit by the issue of child marriage. Now, let me first define child marriage within the African Union context is marrying any child or girl between the age of, below the age of 18. And I'll tell you that when we started this campaign, May 2014, the average, 2015, I think?
Yeah, 2014.
May 2014. The average was about 34-35% of our girls are married on the continent below the age of 18. Now, having said that, there were a few countries where the incidence was even as high as 75%, over 70%. Now, another very interesting discovery, I'll call it a discovery that we made when we had this campaign, was most of the member states, most of the African countries didn't even know the impact of child marriage. There were no proper statistics as to how many girls were married below the age of 18. So each time we're trying to do a launch somewhere, they go back, start doing the study, and they tell us we never knew the problem is this bad. So we were having 40%, 50-something% in quite a number of member states. So what have we been doing? We're using advocacy, that is making everybody aware of the importance of the problem. And then after identifying this problem and making sure that people know what's going on, now we start now on building capacity, at the level where this actually happens, the villages, the less privileged people, because as you know, child marriage has also something to do with the socio-economic development of the societies. You will find out that educated families are less likely to marry their children off below the age of 18. Well, there could be several explanations for that. They are probably able to keep the children in school. So a child who goes to school, a girl who is in high school, is less likely to get married, than the one who sits in the village, not being able to go there. Then the third aspect of our program is, like most of these programs, you could do the advocacy, get everything in place, but it is very, very important to institute monitoring and evaluation of what happens. And we intend to constantly get reports from these countries, see how the program progresses. I said child marriage is the epitome, actually, of all harmful traditional practices because, one, look at our agenda. We're talking about a people-centered agenda. The agenda is going to be run by people. Now, we talk about the demographic dividend, what we are going to benefit, from the youth bulge that we have right now. Most of our population is youth. Majority of the people living in Africa are below the age of 35, nearly 60% or more of them. So it's very important for us to look after these people, health-wise, economic-wise, jobs, education, and everything. These people should be looked after, because they're here now, and they are the ones that will carry the programs ahead. So even when you're talking about demographic dividend, child marriage plays a role here. Because below the age of 18 is when you form the foundation for people. That's when you educate them. That's when they plan how important they are going to be in the society. That's how you prepare them to get to university, tertiary education, and be able to contribute. But what happens? You marry them off at that time, and before you know what's happening, they are already bearing children when they are still children themselves. And this is a disaster about child marriage. Now, it doesn't end there. They are not ready to produce babies. Anatomically, they are not ready to be pregnant. So you have a lot of medical complications. And then you are addressing a chronic problem that we have, the problem of maternal neonatal child health. The mothers die. The highest incidence of death amongst girls of that type is childbirth. Yeah, you see, between the age of 15 to 19 is childbirth. They die while they are producing babies. Sometimes it's almost a blessing to die under these circumstances, believe me. Because what happens if they end up with a fistula, the first thing that the husband does is kick them out of the house. Then they will be shunned by the village and society. And these are the people who will be living at the periphery of the village because they cannot sit with the rest of society. They develop vesicovaginal fistulas. They could develop rectovaginal fistulas. They're either smelling urine all the time or even smelling feces all the time. And society cannot tolerate them. All this suffering because of a problem that's not their own, because of ignorance, because of lack of understanding, and hiding behind what they call cultural issues. And I don't think that's the kind of culture we should be encouraging if we are ready to progress towards our Agenda 2063. Then the next thing, as I said, it impinges on socio-economic development of the countries. Now, we are talking about universal health care. I'm a strong believer of the fact that until we establish universal health care on the continent, I don't think we are going to be able to move much with most of our agendas, because as they say, you need a healthy society, to produce whatever economic gains, a good workforce or whatever. So it's really important for us to look at the health of our people. Now, how are we going to contribute to this universal health care when 34% of our girls are married below that age? And then we increase, because they go to hospital frequently. They never will. They either go or take the babies. They're stretching the health systems of those countries that are already very, very weak. The out-of-pocket expenditure on health increases, because now the parents need to look after these girls or these brides, these child brides, who require a lot of expenditure on health. And guess what? It is that part of society that's vulnerable, society that has no money, a society whereby, a group of people whereby people are afraid to go to hospital because they will be given hospital bills. And this is a society that's going to be most affected. So when we do that, again, we stretch the out-of-pocket. The little thing we're spending on health, we increase the expenditure trying to look after these people. So I think there are so many reasons why we should not encourage child marriage. And we're going to fight within the limits of the African Union. We're going to fight, and our member states are very, very happy to work with us in this issue. We've already launched the child marriage campaign in 14 countries, and very soon we'll do another 20 or so countries. And hopefully by the time we do half or the whole continent, we'll be probably moving to the next phase of capacity building and eventually monitoring what's going on. I think I'll stop there and see.
Oh, wow, that was really very elaborate, educative, enlightening, and you can find out from the presentation from the commissioner that he is really at the top of a very huge department, the Department of Social Affairs, the department that deals with social matters. I will open the floor now, please, to colleagues to ask questions and let the commissioner address them. Let's have the microphone right here. Where do I start? Let me start here. On this row, then I will take this row later. Thank you.
Commissioner, thank you very much.
Introduce yourself and your press organ, please.
Thank you very much, Esther. My name is Groom CCTV. Question, Commissioner, the Africa Center for Disease Control is something that the continent is looking forward to seeing the results. And I know that there is a huge progress when it comes to technicalities of making it happen on the ground. In Addis Ababa, what has been done so far of equipping it, bringing all the necessary material so that it could be functional? Also, human resource, what are you up to? How many people were employed, and how are you planning to integrate the whole continent under the idea of Africa CDC? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giron. Please, next.
My name is Ahmed Adan from BBC Africa. And on migration, and you have mentioned it's Agenda 2063, and it is a long-term solution to the migration crisis. But why does the EU have a specific policy in migration? In example, the high number of people, Somalis, Eritreans, Ethiopians, leaving their countries because of lack of jobs and repressive governments. So yet the AU has not mentioned anything about the situation in those source countries. Thank you.
Thank you. On your right and later on there.
Thank you. Commissioner, will the summit be voting on a proposal to...
Can you please present yourself, my friend?
Sorry, yes.
And use the mic.
Micro, please. Nick Long, Voice of America. Will the summit be voting on a proposal to reduce the number of child marriages, or how do you think the summit will follow up on the concerns you expressed about the rate of child marriage?
Thank you. Please. Can you repeat your question? Voice of America, please.
Thank you. I was asking, will the summit be voting on a proposal to reduce the number of child marriages, or how do you think the summit will follow up on the concerns you expressed about the rate of child marriage?
Thank you. My name is Ethan Tashabia for the New Times Rwanda. You talked about diversifying the economy and increasing jobs in Africa as one of the key areas to solve the migration crisis problems. But do you agree with me that migration to Europe is more than just economic reasons, and it extends to also security reasons as well? Because I heard you talk about that there are opportunities. It's not all bad for people to migrate. I did not understand why you made that statement, and maybe you can clarify. Thank you.
Yes, bring the mic this way. I think we should just gather. Okay, let's allow the commissioner to answer those, and we'll take the second round, please. Thanks.
Thank you very much, because that's quite a mouthful. So I'll do this first before I forget the questions. Now, first, let me try to respond to CCTV, Groom, and what has been done regarding the Africa Centers for Disease Control. And then you also wanted to know how we're going to interface with the whole continent on this. We have moved considerably from the last time I spoke to the media on this. You remember, I always want to start with the decision of the heads of states in terms of the way forward for Africa Centers for Disease Control. Work with the WHO and other relevant partners to get an Africa Centers for Disease Control on the move. First, put a coordination center within the African Union, and then this will be followed by 5 regional centers. And this basically sort of answers the question you have posed. We had the first meeting of the governing board, so that's already a step forward. We have epidemiologists that are already on the ground. You asked about personnel, that's already a step forward. We have appointed a director for the Africa Centers for Disease Control who is yet to come on the ground, and this is yet to be announced. That's probably why you haven't heard about it. But I would say that's a lot of movement. Now, we're working together with our partners. We have very interested partners in the Africa Centers for Disease Control, and this is namely, mostly actually China CDC and the American CDC who are working with us. We are trying to set up an event-based surveillance system and an EOC, Emergency Operations Center, for the time being within the African Union Commission in Addis Ababa that will be responding to the reports that are coming out. We have identified the 5 regional centers that are going to be reporting to the Africa Centers for Disease Control. So I would say that's a lot of progress that has been made. And as I'm talking to you, a lot is going to be moving once we get a director in place and it starts working. With the next regional meeting of WHO, the second meeting of the governing board is going to take place, and then again, we're going to have the advisory board, which involves the WHO and the other technical components of like medical laboratories on the continent are also going to be working with us. So I would say we've made quite a lot of progress, but you have to agree with me that this requires a lot of planning, We have to be very careful in what we are doing because remember, we're trying to set up a center that's going to ask most of the member states to, in a way, cede their sovereignty, towards this center. By this, I mean, you will be reporting some of your medical findings to a center outside. So that center has to be credible, it has to be transparent, it has to be competent, and this is why we are taking our time, trying to set this up. And I can assure you at the end of the day, we're going to produce a center for you that will answer to all these three issues. Now, the other question, I think from the BBC, long-term issue, AU-specific policy on Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia. I think when I started, that was the first question that I told you about. I said there are immediate, medium-term issues, and I think I outlined those ones. And then I said there are long-term issues. I also outlined those ones. The same countries you named, I gave you those same countries in our Horn of Africa initiative where we are talking about human trafficking and smuggling. I think I elaborated on that quite a bit. And now it's not only the four countries, Somalia, South Sudan, I think Djibouti, about 8 countries are now involved in this program. So we are not entirely quiet about that people that are moving from Somalia and coming up. We are also aware that the eastern route has become very, very important. The Yemen, and places like that is very important. And I still stand by I think this goes to the next question, the one from Rwanda. I'll take this because this is together, with the others. Migration, what benefits what opportunities can you find from migration? You said you couldn't understand what I was talking about. There is already the African Institute of Remittances that's set up, working with the African Union. African Institute of Remittances, it's set up in Nairobi. We're talking about something like 55 billion. I hear now it's gone up to 60-something billion of remittances that are coming from our brothers and sisters that are working abroad. Yeah. So this is both from there and also from within Africa. Rwanda is working in Uganda, sending money to their people, and and vice versa. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Again, opportunities. If I'm sure it's not all the migrants that go to Europe or anywhere else are just floating around the streets. They must be working. They must be doing some jobs which the Europeans are either not capable of doing or which they have not had the chance to find a human resource, to apply. So these are benefiting those economies. So opportunities both ways. Here we get the remittances, and work is being done. They are contributing to the economies of those countries. So this is what I mean by opportunities. And I can even stretch the issue of opportunities even further than that. Believe me, if you look at any aspect of migration, even the challenges, you look at it closely and you plan properly, you might turn that challenge around to an opportunity. So actually this is what I mean. And this is something I believe in. This is why the issue of migration has to be looked at from the countries where the migrants take off from, the transit areas, and the destination areas themselves. It's not a problem of Europe alone. We need to assist them. It's not a problem of Africa alone. They need to assist us. And that's the only way we can address these problems. You said something about I think somebody else raised a question about what we are going to do about people running away from wars and things like that. In the African Union, you hear about programs like silencing the guns by 2020. Yeah, it has become a big challenge, but we're working towards that, And somebody reminded me this morning, what are you going to do while you are doing this press conference? There was peace in South Sudan, and now they started fighting while you are here. Well, that's the job that the AU has cut out for itself. We are trying. We're hoping eventually, by silencing the guns in 2020, we may institute a bit more better governance that we are having already. The last question I remember was the summit for reduction of, is it child marriage? The summit that we are going to be holding on child marriage. Yeah. Yeah. No, the summit definitely will address child marriage. As I said, the first thing you do is make sure that the member states are aware of what's happening, the advocacy part of it. That we have done very, very well. We have a lot of support in terms of drumming up the boost for building capacity. We have some very competent partners like Ford Foundation, the government of Canada. I usually try to avoid naming countries because I leave a few out. You know, DFID, quite a number of others. Very, very substantial support that we're getting from these partners in terms of building capacity and carrying out this program. We are seriously planning on monitoring and evaluation, and these are all going to be worked out in this conference. You know, it's a means of continuing our advocacy. We started off with each member state. Now we really want the blessing of all the heads of states sitting together, making decisions, passing resolutions, and clear plans as to how we are going to go forward. You remember this was an initiative that was simply started from within the African Union, and now it has actually gone worldwide. And if you see the support we are having, particularly from countries like Canada, you will see that we've managed to sell it worldwide, and I'm sure it will bear fruit eventually.
Let's get the second round from this roll, please. The mic, start here and go behind.
Thank you very much. My name is Samuel. I work for Radio Mucho here in Rwanda. My question, Commissioner, you've said about child marriage, but nowadays, as we hear another problem of homosexuality around the world, for instance, in American and European countries. So I would like to ask you, where are you standing as African countries about this issue? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Next, please.
Thank you so much. I am Simon Kamuzinzi. I work for Kigali Today. It's an online journal and Kate Radio. Mine is about, you have been talking about child marriage, but there is another problem hampering or hindering the development of unwanted pregnancies. Unwanted pregnancies is very, very dangerous than child marriage, because many families here in Africa, they care about the grandchildren, many parents, many families. How are you standing in fighting against that issue? Thank you.
Thank you, please. The mic to the next, behind you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. My name is Irene Kimenya. I work with RBA. Actually, mine is a very easy question. It's all about statistics. Can you please shed more lights about statistics, looking at the migration from Africa to elsewhere in the world? Thank you.
Okay, let me just have a last one from TVC, please, if you don't mind. Not the last round. We'll take a more question. We want the Commissioner to answer those questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner. Still talking about migration. Now, you talked about campaigns against child marriage that the AU is making around the continent. But considering the death toll we have, what campaigns or what efforts is the AU also making to create awareness on how dangerous the traveling to the Italian coast through the Mediterranean is? Because if people know how perilous these journeys are, they would most likely remain in Africa than decide to endanger their lives. And secondly, how does the AU intend to silence the guns by 2020? Because the chairperson noted yesterday that the African Union can only persuade heads of governments to carry out, to implement policies they pledge to at summits like this. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's allow the Commissioner to answer those questions, then we'll take a last round. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The questions are getting a bit more difficult now. Now, the child marriage and homosexuality. We are currently not working on that, in the African Union. We already have enough problems with our less than 18-year-olds dying, getting married, at the time when they should be producing, when we should be sending them to school. I would like to come back at a much later date, maybe in the very, very far future, to answer your question on homosexuality. It's not one of our priorities at the moment on the continent. Now, then I think that was Kigali Today, Journal and Radio, unwanted pregnancies. I do not agree with you that unwanted pregnancies are more important than child marriage, because the two are linked. You really think that 15-year-old bride wants to get pregnant? She has no idea. It's the same unwanted pregnancy. And this one, in fact, is almost tantamount to rape. You can even call it violence against women. You can name it anything. But in a context, this one is even worse. In a context where she has nowhere to run to. She cannot run to the mother, because the mother will simply hold her back and say, go back there, because the mother herself most probably was married at the age of 15. So again, let me re-emphasize here, there is nothing worse than child marriage. All those things you are talking about are all embedded in the issue of child marriage. They get pregnant when they don't want to, and the worst part of it is they are not even ready yet. They are not even ready anatomically or otherwise. So it's similarly important. Then the issue of the death toll, we have our campaign against child marriage goes again together with the violence against women, crisis periods, war period, and this includes even migrants. We are trying to look at what's happening with migrants, but that, again, is a big, big issue, because here we are not in control. We don't know where they are. We don't know what's happening. Sometimes they are not even accessible. If you take a camp in Libya, for instance, we've been trying to see what we can do about that camp. We don't know what's happening in those camps. We cannot cope with the traffickers. And most of these cases we are talking about are gold mines for smugglers, for sex workers, and all these other issues that go along with the problem of migration. This is very difficult for the African Union, because there are no statistics, no reports, no specific reports. We don't know what we are working with. They are very far away. We have not had several arrests, even in Europe or otherwise, in terms of migrants, So actually, that's something, thank you for the question, that will make it very important for us to look into this a little bit more. In terms of the statistics, I think I'll have to ask my director here to assist me with some statistics. I think it was on migration.
Well, thank you very much, Director. Thank you very much, Commissioner. My Commissioner is trying to pass the more difficult questions to his Director. But I'm not going to go into the controversy of statistics. If you recall at the beginning, the Commissioner did mention that most of the migration takes place on this continent, and that is the truth. So whether you're looking for any figure or not, within the ECOWAS region, they have more than 95% of the migrants within the ECOWAS region. Within East Africa, it's about 70-something%. In SADC, it's about 50-something to 60-something. It's perhaps only in North Africa that is a bit less. However, in terms of those who try to go to Europe, they're still extremely in minority if most of the migration takes place on the continent. And regardless of figures that is paraded up, here and there, the anecdote to that is this. When we look at the remittance flow, and you see the increase in the remittance flow, it gives us, we can use that to triangulate and have a kind of, we can use that to try to have an estimate or a view. Now, it goes like this. Yes, remittance, according to the statistics from our Send Money Africa, and you can check it out on Send Money Africa, the largest flow is still from Europe to Africa, followed by in Africa itself, and then from North Africa and from Middle East. But when you disaggregate the data to see the small amounts of the remittance flow and the consistency, and then you can multiply that by those who send the money, then it gives you it confirms the fact that most migrants are still on this continent, because those from Europe do send huge sums of money. Those from North America send huge sums of money, but those within the continent send very consistently 300, 200, 300 to 500 consistently every month. So the anecdote confirms that in terms of statistics. My commissioner had already pointed out, it's not as if they're not, we're not in any, how do I put it, enlightenment campaign. I just came back from the field less than 2 weeks ago. And when I say from the field, I've been in the desert across West Africa to North Africa. And there is a lot of enlightenment campaign going on. But, sometimes we say in Africa, the dog, the hunting dog that is going to be lost, sometimes will not listen to the whistle of the hunter. They can keep telling you that there is, yes, there is not much opportunity, but there is indeed opportunities, as my commissioner tried to point out. And I can tell you of personal experiences and cases of those who have good opportunities and still offer themselves to be smuggled, because you make a distinction between those who are trafficked and those who are smuggled. Sometimes you wonder if you have to pay some huge amounts of money to smugglers, can't you use that same amount of money to provide yourself with opportunities? And then I've interviewed victims or migrants who have tried 3-4 times trying to cross on the boat, and each time has to swim back. And I ask, why must you go forward when you've personally experienced that? Sometimes the response they give to you is quite instructive, and then you know that your enlightenment might work even at the countries of origin, but but for those who will not listen to you, they will not listen to you. So that is that. My commissioner also mentioned. Yes, he is a physician, so he has adequately addressed the pregnancy-related from the under 15. You need to understand that when you look at maternal mortality figures going down the continent, it stubbornly remained high within the ages of 15 to 19, and it's pregnancy-related. Whether that pregnancy is a result of child marriage or, like you rightly said, where a child is being given away, is pregnant, the urge for those grandchild you're talking about is not just they send you to, you go and get married to whoever got you pregnant. And sometimes it's old persons. These young girls cannot negotiate sex. But apart from that, there is a failure on the part of the society to meet what we call the unmet needs of young people, family planning, contraceptives. For whatever the reasons are, we continue to fail to meet the unmet needs of the young people. So whether it's in terms of the campaign for child marriage or meeting their needs for family planning and contraceptives, then we need to do more. It explains today, when you take a survey among young girls, what are you more afraid of? Getting pregnant or contracting HIV and AIDS? You'll be shocked that quite a number of the survey shows that they are afraid of getting pregnant. They're not afraid of contracting HIV and AIDS. It's not because people can live with HIV and AIDS. It's because of the failure of the society to meet the unmet needs of young women. And it goes to the heart of what my commissioner said earlier. You want to achieve demographic dividend. In the health context of demographic dividend, we must meet the unmet needs of young people, the family planning, their consumables and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Maigun. Let's take the last rounds of questions for the Commissioner. Remittance, there was a follow-up question. Please take the mic.
About the remittances, you have mentioned both. And people sending money from the abroad, sometimes it looks like that they are encouraging people to move from their country to European countries when they are sending a lot of money. For example, if I am in Somalia, my friend migrates to Europe, sends a lot of money, builds a big house, buying cars, I will go and migrate. So isn't there sending money and remittances encouraging people to move from their countries to another countries? Thank you.
Okay, give it to your neighbor.
Ok, merci de la parole. Je m'appelle Badi Banga, journaliste de... Ok, merci. Voilà. Je m'appelle Badi Banga, journaliste de Mama Radio en République démocratique du Congo. Je suis extrêmement intéressé par l'intervention du commissaire et ça me pousse à poser quelques questions dans les deux sens. Le premier sens, en termes d'immigration, le SR compte plus d'1 million de personnes ou des Africains qui ont migré vers l'Europe en traversant la Méditerranée l'année 2015. Et beaucoup parmi ces gens sont dans de mauvaises conditions de vie dans leur pays d'accueil, dit-on. Comment l'Union africaine est intervenue pour venir en aide à ces Africains, à ces compatriotes en situation difficile? La deuxième question, c'est celle de savoir comment, à votre avis, les problèmes de migration affectent particulièrement les femmes? Dernière question sur ce point. Vous avez bien souligné que l'Afrique a ses problèmes et là aussi ses solutions. Mais alors, quelles sont les pistes de solutions que vous pourriez proposer? Des solutions durables, je veux dire, que vous pourriez proposer pour évidemment réduire l'ampleur de ces migrations irrégulières que l'on considère aujourd'hui comme une épidémie. Et côté mariage, parce que vous en avez parlé, mariage d'enfants, moi je me demande pratiquement, généralement ces mariages d'enfants sont dus aux traditions ou aux pratiques de coutumes selon certaines sources. Mais je me demande où est la justice en Afrique, où est la justice en Afrique pour décourager cette pratique qui est une forme de violence sexuelle. Et la dernière question, en tout cas, c'est par rapport au... Voilà. Voilà. La deuxième question, c'est un rapport avec les mutilations génitales féminines. Voilà, les mutilations génitales féminines. Qu'est-ce que l'Union africaine fait pour arrêter cette pratique? Et quelles sont les statistiques aujourd'hui?
Okay, thank you. Give the microphone to the lady right behind. She has been asking the floor. Yeah, the lady right behind in red. Yeah, you. Yeah.
Yeah, Karine de Plessis, I'm writing for News 24. I had a question for the Commissioner. This stuff on migration, the points that you mentioned that Africa should be doing, I think it was the same points you mentioned in January at the summit and probably before that as well. I just want to know, how do you measure that these steps are being implemented, and how do you measure the effectiveness of these steps and the strategy?
My question is Ami Gunza from BBC News. My question is also on migration. The EU has recently announced a substantial fund to aid African countries in trying to help in the migration crisis. I want specifics about how the African Union is working with partners like that in dealing with the issue. And you've spoken about the frustrations of dealing with migrant abuse in places like Libya, which with the situation there, it's really hard to work on. But there are proper functioning states where abuses of migrants are happening. In Saudi Arabia, we saw expulsions. In Israel now, there are Africans who are being returned to the continent, yet the African Union has not mentioned anything about those abuses happening in those countries.
Thank you very much. Rodrigo Guiraira is my name. Mr. Commissioner, my colleague has just asked the question, but it seems from your response, the African Union Commission is giving it a cold shoulder about LGBT, which is becoming a global issue and concern. Can we say that really at the AU level, you have ignored it, that it has nothing to do with your agenda because you have other things to take care of? Like you said, the unwanted pregnancies, early marriages, and all these things. We've seen people just across there, people being killed or being lynched on the streets because of their sexual orientation. So you need to tell us more what is really the AU position on this. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've got all the questions because most of the questions keeps almost repeating themselves. So let's give the opportunity to the Commissioner to address those last questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very searching questions. Now, the issue of remittances. Yes, I agree with you. When we're looking at push and pull factors, remittances come up very high on the list. One very important point that we have noticed is that a migrant calls home, tells his peers, the boys he grew with, oh, now I'm this, I'm working here. Most of the time it's true, sometimes it's not. But they paint a glorified picture of wherever they are. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to justify where you trekked across the Sahara Desert and tempted the Mediterranean in the first place. So you have to paint a glorious picture. And this is education we give to people, that Europe is not all rosy. There is unemployment in Europe also. Now, but the fact of the matter is, we gave you figures, and that's a fact. There is a lot of money coming from Europe in the form of remittances. That's a fact you can't deny. Mm-hmm. But to tell you the truth, the number that's sending those remittances is much, much, much smaller, than those that are just there actually barely living by the day. So that those are the things that you need to keep in mind. That we have been trying to discourage those rosy pictures that are being painted. There's a lot of education amongst at member state level to trying to tell people or our young people about the dangers of migration. But believe me, if you've ever had the experience of trying to convince somebody who wants to migrate to Europe, trying to tell them, don't go, it's dangerous, you'll die in the Mediterranean, if you have the practical experience, you will not be asking that question. Because you may end up even becoming an enemy, or this man doesn't want me to progress in life. That's the kind of thing you will hear. So it's a bit more deeper than the way you see it. It's a very, and it goes on again with the fact that there isn't much you can do for this person here. He's probably looking for a job. You cannot provide a job for him. So it puts you at a disadvantage when you are doing this advocacy of trying to tell him not to go. The question is, what's the advantage? But then again, remember, these people pay a lot of money to smugglers and traffickers. If they spend this money, 2-3 of them spend this money, open a small business, they might probably even do better, than taking the risks, going over there. And this is what our advocacy is all about. We are trying to explain most of these issues to them. Then I think the other question again on migration.
Okay, no, go ahead. This is the French guy.
Okay. The other question on migration was, what is the AU doing? I like these issues of what is the AU doing. But what was it? Women mostly affected. I don't recall the question clearly, but there was something about child marriage and the legal aspects of it. And there was something about
how migration affects women and what's of the
mm-hmm. Yeah, the effect of migration on women and where to where. Yeah, I think that was the question. We are aware, in the Department of Social Affairs, we consider women as a vulnerable group. Under any circumstances on this continent, they are a vulnerable group. You either abuse them when they are children, you even abuse them if they are adults and when they are married. And even when they work, even pay is not the same. You know, that problem is there. That's something we need to address as well. But we are taking cognizance, of what's happening to these women, and we've been trying to include that in our system of education, the advocacy that we're doing. If you attend one of our child marriage launching programs, you will see that we try to bring everybody on board, and the issue you raise is mostly what we are addressing, when we're having the child marriage issues. Now, the legal aspect of it is part of our program. And I must tell you that we've made some inroads in this. Zimbabwe, Malawi, there have been cases where legal action has been taken, against people who marry children very young, and that is something that we are pushing. And I hope that most of our member states will look at that. Now, a very interesting question that came that it's an eye-opener. As I said, we are going to we're going to put emphasis on the monitoring and evaluation. The question from the back reminded me something that I said about a year ago, and something I'm saying now, just adding a little bit in terms of what I thought should be done in terms of addressing the root causes, of migration. And the question was, I find this very, very important. How are you going to measure, exactly what you are saying, whether you are making progress or not? Now, in the issue of child marriage, for instance, we have we've put up ways whereby we will measure, what is going to be happening. People will come back and report to us. It is very, very difficult to measure the degree whereby the economy of Africa has been diversified. It's going to be very, very difficult to measure whether industrialization has been favored. More cocoa is being processed on the African continent than the chocolates are made out there. But that's a very good idea. I think we should start looking at those figures and bring them out to you. It's not very difficult to establish the issue of illicit financial flows, but what is more difficult is how to stop them. So if you're not going to have methods put in place as how to stop those ones, it's going to be very difficult to come up with those figures. Now, in short, what I'm trying to say is the same conditions that cause the problems in the first place make it very difficult for you to quantitate them. Because if it's easy for you to quantitate them, you will probably find a solution much easier. But there are aspects, there are sides of the whole problem of migration that will rather have the status quo, And I keep telling you about opportunities rather than challenges, But this is not from the point of view of Africa alone. This looking at challenges and opportunities should go right across the continent to other places where our people migrate to. If they don't work with us, we're not going to be able to convert these challenges to the opportunities I'm talking about. This is the kind of thing we all need to handle together. Africa is not going to be able to do it alone. Now, so for those of you who always ask, what's the AU doing, about this, what's the AU doing about that on migration, please, we are not going to be able to do it alone, because once the people leave this continent, they get to the Mediterranean, they are not under our control. When they get to Europe, they are not under our control either. We'll not be able to solve the problem here. All of us have a responsibility in this one. We have a very, very serious responsibility. It's a moral responsibility. It's an economic responsibility that affects both sides. And this is the way we should look at it. This is what I mean when I talk about converting challenges to opportunities. It cannot be done on one side. It has to be on both sides. I think there was if you just give me a couple of seconds, let me look at the question that came in French. Answer part of it. What AU is doing about migration problems. Okay, I think I caught the issue of genital mutilation and I think the activity on female genital mutilation has been more proactive. There is more work done on genital mutilation, surprisingly, even out there in Europe, much more than it is being done in Africa here. So I'm just saying now that here at this point, we are building up the issue on child marriage, to get to that level. There is more advocacy on female genital mutilation outside the continent than on child marriage. So what we are trying to do is to increase the awareness from the African point of view to make sure that we also bring out the issue of child marriage. This is why I'm emphasizing the point that child marriage is just as bad, if not even worse. You talk about female genital mutilation. We have had cases where a 12-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 10-year-old forced into marriage has to undergo, very premature sexual activities with an adult. And the kind of mutilation that takes place there is not the kind of mutilation you are seeing in FGM. So they're equally important. I think the other question was something about what the AU is doing in terms of migration and abuse of migrants in the Middle East, and some of those other countries. You have to know also that the AU has a partnership program with the Middle East. There is the Afro-Arab cooperation, and we meet regularly. Migration is one of the issues that we talk about. The last meeting that took place in Kuwait, I remember presenting a paper addressing exactly the issues that you've been talking about. Then it's given down to the member states to see what they can do, because at that level, the member states also have a major role to play in terms of educating their people. We've made the advocacy, we've made a lot of references to this. The question of LGBT and why you think Africa is ignoring the problem, that's not the kind of problem you can ignore. We are not ignoring the problem. We are just saying that at the present moment, we don't have a common African position on LGBT. I don't know of one. The issues I'm talking about here right now are the issues which my department is mandated to handle. And most of them, if you recall, I've just told you that there is an assembly decision on this. The heads of state said this, that we are handling. Well, it's quite possible that at some point in time, the African Union may take the issue of LGBTs, but right now, it's just not the kind of thing I can give you detailed information on. So I think.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We've listened to the Commissioner of Social Affairs. He's still very open to interviews. I also want to recognize in the room the presence of the Commissioner for Economic Affairs, His Excellency Dr. Anthony Motai Maroping. He's also very available for every type of interview you may be requesting today. This is a very good day for us. RTV, the Rwandan television, if you are ready, Commissioner will be coming to your studio immediately now. I just want to thank Her Excellency for creating time to come and address the journalists this morning. And thank you for really giving us this very educative, knowledgeable content on the activities under your department. Director Mrs. Mahawa Kaba-Wheeler, Director for Women, Gender and Development of the African Union. She's already here with us. She's coming just to come and address you.